To order. Today is meeting number 11 for fiscal year 2021, and we are meeting tonight. We are on channels 24 for Verizon and 191 for Charter, which is different than what we're typically on. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, and the governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Westborough Advisory Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation. We may be watched through either Verizon or Charter or via YouTube on /Westborough TV, or there will be a recorded version on westboroughTV.org under the Government tab, Meetings on Demand. Today, we will pass over the minutes. I put them in the agenda and then I didn't send them out. I will send them out after the meeting and we will review them for our next call. But we are really here to review the school budget with our superintendent. So, and then after that, we'll do what we usually do with future agendas and committee updates. So, Superintendent Bach, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to be here with you. And our Director of Finance and Administration, Irene Oliver, is also here joining us. And between the two of us, we look to answer your questions. And as always, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. So if you're comfortable, we'll dive right in. I know your time is really valuable and I want to focus on providing the most time possible for questions. I've tried to provide, I'm going to share a presentation that takes about 15 minutes, but I've built in time for questions. So we'll stop along the way and be able to discuss it in chunks, I think, and then time to talk at the end. I want to introduce myself again, like Amber Bach, Superintendent of Schools, and you have new members. And so for those of you new to the board, we've worked very hard over the years to get to a place where the schools will come forward to meet with you as often as you need to feel that you have the opportunity to review the budget, to ask questions. We'll meet with you one-on-one. We'll send you information, whatever you feel you need. I want to be clear that the school committee sends me to present to you with the acknowledgement that we know it is vitally important that we seek the support of the Advisory Finance Committee for our budget. We consider it an essential part of budget process, that we've worked with you towards a place where you stand and recognize and are able to feel that you can support the budget that we bring forth. We understand your role to push back, so I want to be clear for new members. I'm very comfortable if you ask us hard questions. If Irene and I aren't able to answer a question for you, we'll get back to you in 48 hours. We'll just note it and make sure that we swing back and provide for you what you need. So why don't we dive right in? And so I'm comfortable with you asking questions along the way, but I want to be clear too, I've also built in pauses. So that will help us as well. So let me see if I can see, let's see, I want to present a window. I want to see if I can get what I need here. All right, I'm going to wait and see until I feel like you guys can see my screen. So are you seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Which is so different than Zoom. Okay, yeah. I want to make sure. Are you seeing just my presentation or are you also seeing your own faces? Are you seeing my whole screen or just the...
I can see my faces along the right-hand side, and I can see your slide in the main section.
Okay, I'm going to make this smaller and this bigger. Are you comfortable that you can see this well? Okay. Hank, do you need it bigger? You good?
You're muted.
Okay. Just want to make sure you can, when we're looking at numbers and things, you guys.
We're all here, thanks.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure that you can see and that I can see you a little bit because it's weird to talk to people you can't see. All right, so it's about a 15-minute presentation, and it's basically a synthesis of the ones that we've sent you. And I think one of the things we tried to do this year is also send the clips of Westborough TV. I think they do a really nice job. So that also helps you break it down into smaller chunks if that's what you prefer. So what we'll do, let me get over into here. I'm going to basically focus on giving you a quick review of the timeline and our shared goals in developing budgeting, as well as a review of the FY21 budget and its outcomes, as it definitely has impact into the budgeting for FY22. And I think we would all certainly recognize that the budgeting of FY21 was incredibly complex and staged over multiple interventions. And I want to review those with you. And then I'll look at presenting FY22 and the impacts and process and recommendations. So the timeline is really, we start right from the beginning of the year. You know, certainly we had a complex opening, but as soon as we were up and functional and serving students, we dove right into developing an assessment of cost centers and beginning budgeting right away. You can see where we are highlighted in yellow tonight. We met yesterday with Beth and Hank to make sure that they felt confident that they could target the kind of areas they wanted us to focus on with you, and then we're meeting with you now. It's very important that our meeting with you occur before school committee is voting the final budget. They find that an important process piece, and so they are watching tonight, and it's important for them to hear your input. So we really always start with our goals, and each year we build the budget from a zero-based approach, looking at what we need to accomplish, what our current enrollment is, and we focus on these 4 areas. And we kind of refined them and changed them over the years as we've developed as both a district and our relationship with the town. It is our goal to present a strong public school education to families and students in Westborough, and to maintain that excellence such that they can expect it year over year. Another core value for us is really respecting the relationships we face and kind of the triad of the stakeholders that we're in relationship with: our families, our faculty, and our community members. We believe the schools are integral to serving all of those, not just for the service of education, but for participation in the community, and recognizing that we need to manage our costs both internally and also as well for its impact at the town tax rate and level of impact. We also really like to have worked on being strategic and forward-looking so that we can stage changes both to our work, to our financial projects in terms of building care, such that we can really work with the town to be strategic against their larger goals as well. We always present a quick snapshot of the budget history. These are budgets that we've worked on with you year over year, and you see the asterisk next to the FY21 budget, and I'll dive in there. So the summary of the FY21 budget, just you were along for this ride, the majority of you, other than some of our new members, but I'm sure you were paying attention. Anybody who is brave enough to rotate onto FinCom and put in the time and energy is usually paying attention to town process. So our first stage budget, we really came in with a lot of clarity in FY21 to articulate the fact that we settled a contract with our teachers that required some substantial commitment to moving them towards the ground they had lost over the last 8 years. We really had gotten into, we had worked very hard with the teachers around a collaborative salary table, and yet over the 8 years it was in place, we realized, and so did they, that our salaries were in a substantially different place to our local communities: Shrewsbury, Hopkinton, Grafton, and Northborough, Southborough, at about a $25,000 deficit on average to the annual yearly earnings of our teachers. So as we moved into our contract negotiations, we worked with them strategically to commit to moving them back to a better place competitively, so that the opportunity to stay and work in a community they care about could be comparable, at least closely comparable, to the areas in which they live and work. We also had a substantial transportation contract. We had had a very, very advantageous contract for multiple years. We also had multiple problems. And in setting our new transportation contract, we articulate that we were going to take a hit on the cost, and we did indeed take a hit. So $25,000. Did I say $25,000 annually, Beth? So we really had, because we eliminated the COLA for 8 years and they just stepped. So the table didn't grow. So we can talk about that offline. Okay. So then our second stage budget was then to face the fact that we came in and looked at the cost of that budget, and the school committee wanted us to go back and look for mitigating factors after we got the bus contract, and I'll show you that in a minute, and then look for some offsets. So they actually revoted the budget from their first preliminary budget after the transportation contract came in. And then, of course, the bottom fell out when COVID hit, and we took another major cut from the budget for impacts, recognizing tax revenue losses. And then we also worked to manage the tuition-free kindergarten transition without utilizing a warrant article because we didn't have a town meeting until the following year. So what that ended up looking like, and I'll give you a couple more financial detail slides, was my first preliminary proposal with no transportation contract and 2 FTE for high school growth was a 3.48% increase. It then ballooned to 5.38 when the transportation contract came in around $1 million, an increase over what we had. School committee asked me to go back and to work with Irene to see if we could find possible mitigating approaches to that. And I came back with an additional cut recommendation, and the final approved budget that we actually worked on and presented with you through AFC in the large group gathering we held came in at 4.31. And we anticipated coming into town meeting at that amount. This is the cut that we took to bring it down from the $1 million impact of the bus. The areas to focus on there, in some ways we went back in and relooked at the contract and took out areas where we thought we could be more aggressive in anticipating costs. And I don't think that those funds need to or will roll back into the budget over time. But there are areas where we took true cuts that have impact year over year. We cut $60,000 from technology. We utilized the $100,000 we usually hold in circuit breaker for unknown tuitions, and we did really what is a practice we all avoid doing and took a one-time offset from community ed at $200,000, which equates to basically going to free cash for operational cost. And we try and recognize that that's not a good practice. So, but that's what we did that allowed us to come before you at that large meeting and take that cut of the 563 and come in with a budget plan. After the bottom fell out with COVID, we then worked collaboratively with the town and with the school committee and with you to cut an additional $700,000 from the budget in reductions that were eliminations of positions, eliminations and reductions, basically. We deferred some hiring and then we eliminated some other positions. We cut supplies, we cut curriculum, we cut $150,000 from technology, and we deferred facilities care at $61,000. Those are pretty substantial losses. So from there, we came into town meeting, voted without any questions at 2.97%. We feel good about that work. We recognize that it needed to happen given the COVID situation, but I think you all recognize as money people the financial impact of those types of cuts as we look at budgeting forward from there. So as we started looking forward to FY22, year 2 of the salary contracts and transportation roll forward, we knew we would face 13 positions from kindergarten coming into the budget for FY22. And we had cut 1.2 almost 1.3 million from the contract. So that's the framework with which we came into budgeting for FY22. I wonder if you have questions. I'm going to back up to this slide for a second. The other impact, again, to the contract discussion that I articulated before I take questions on the first section, the teacher contract will be in year 2 for FY22. It has a 3.8 step and a 2.5 COLA. Even tackling that over 3 years, it brings them only, back to comparable while other districts are making gains at the same time. So the commitment we have with our faculty is to recognize, one, they value working here and our working conditions, and our students are amazing and our families, but they have to remain competitive, and this contract helps move us back in that direction. We had 4 other units we settled that did not have the same level of deficit to the comparable communities. Those were settled much more advantageously. And in looking at FY22, we were clear that we would be forwarding no new positions. We will face a circuit breaker gap, and I'll detail that to you. We knew that we were going to be looking at kindergarten and then the technology deficit. So that seems like a bit of a bleak setting. I don't mean it to be, but I think it's important that we revisit that framework to set context for you before we talk about kind of where we ended up with the recommendation I put forward. So I guess I would pause here. That's a lot of information. And I think I'll open it up to questions. And Sean, I'll let you direct that, and I'll.
I'm muted, pardon me. Yeah, Jody, please go ahead.
Sure. Could you go back to the slide for us, Amber?
Sure, let me get there. Here?
Yep. So that's pretty important information that it sounds like our average teacher salary is $25,000 behind our abutting districts. I think that's very important. And I'm just looking, and you explained that there were no cost of living increases over that time. And I know from the time I was on school committee, we worked really hard to engineer a 2% table, which was interesting and novel, hadn't been done by anyone else anywhere else. But I guess we found out what happened over 8 years. Our teachers got behind, competitively behind. So when you look at this 3.8% step and 2.5% COLA, that is going to begin to bring those teachers back in line with our neighboring districts. Has the school committee changed its philosophy on that? Or tell me how we got from a very strict new 2% table with many more steps to this agreement on this contract?
Sure, great question. And you have a lot of depth of knowledge on it, of course. So I'll keep my answers simple, hopefully. We reset a 12-step table, Jody, and we pulled the way the table used to work before, for those of you on the board, it dropped the bottom and it added a 2% step at the top, and it just became a rolling 2% table. And then it leveled out at a 2%, a standard basically step in between. So you knew that over time, if you were rolling it forward at 2% and dropping the back, you were losing any differential steps in between, and you were going to end up with a leveled table that was a 2% table. Conceptually, is very strong. It let us live through the growth in the district during a time when adding new positions at the same time, because we were facing so much growth, that we had a controlled table, benefited the district and benefited the community. So I think the work was really well done, and I think it served us well. And the recovery towards a transition that lets us now shift the table and take what we learned to create a 12-step table. The thing that we did that's advantageous in that is that we leveled everything across the table. So there's no surprises in it. It's a 3.8-step table, and it's controlled. So you don't hit the tables in a lot of districts. You might get like a 6% one year and somebody else gets a 1. Like they have a lot of like inconsistencies. And the thing that our negotiation team did was basically pull back all the funds, level them out, and create a stable table that's consistent so that we can anticipate year over year our general costs.
Okay. Got it. Thanks. That's helpful. So we're having to play a little catch up to bring everyone up to competitive salary, but it's much more predictable year over year than it was in the old days.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I think Andrew and then Mike, maybe.
Yeah, thanks very much. So Amber, I hear the call for no new positions. I wonder if you could frame that in the context of the expected student population growth, or whether or not that's perceived to be really at a more level state right now.
That's a great question as well, Andrew. So we're anticipating that when Daniel did his presentation on enrollment, the overall anticipated enrollment, given what we're tracking right now, was down 18 students. Now, we're anticipating, given that we had, it's a very weird year. I don't know if you're paying attention. Well, I know you're paying attention. You might not be paying attention to the detail of schooling. And what we're finding is that across the state and nationally, there's a depression that doesn't seem typical in enrollments in districts, because some families pulled their kids out to homeschool that wouldn't normally, but they don't want to be at school in the structure that's been provided. Some people have taken their kids out of school and have gone completely online in other organizations. And some people have moved to private settings because they could attend 5 days a week. So we're missing about 100 students right now in our count that we anticipate will fold back in the fall. So with other types of normal transitions and comings and goings and enrollment, we anticipate that we'll be level. So we might go, I anticipate we'll be up some, but not substantially. So, yep, we'll keep it level.
All right, Mike.
Amber, can I take you back to the compensation issue again, please?
Sure.
The $25,000 gap between Westborough and the surrounding communities is a pretty substantial number. Is there any possibility that we're going to be anticipating a continuation of that gap going forward as the other communities increase their compensation? And is there a possibility that you'll come back to town meeting, let's say, before this current contract ends, and say to us, yeah, we have a really big gap, we've got to make it up, and we've got to make it up with a higher compensation table?
Great question. I know that we won't come back to town meeting to modify our contract within the cycle of a contract. That practice isn't what the union expects. It's not what they agreed to, and it's not what we would implement. There are a couple things that are advantageous to allowing us to continue to make good progress. This gets us back into a good place, such that, again, the other districts, we can't anticipate necessarily what they'll negotiate and where they'll be. We certainly discussed that with our collaboration kind of bargaining at the table. I think everybody feels that we made at working together an incredibly strong commitment to the faculty of Westborough in the contract we settled, because they also recognized that they had worked with us on the previous contracts, and they also know that the community at large has to stage back those transitions. So this is year 2, so then next year will be year 3. We'll enter negotiations probably end of this year and start those projections. You'll probably see a similar contract. We want to stay stable, but it won't. I don't think it would be, again, I can't speak because it's negotiations, but I don't anticipate it to be way out of whack with what we did this time.
Well, I guess as we look at our surrounding communities, they look at us.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that they're not going to want to be in a position where they're not competitive on staff recruitment. Isn't there a danger, or are you thinking about the possibility that this gap is really not going to close that quickly over a short period of time, and we're going to always be faced with this differential between us and the rest of the area?
Again, I think negotiations is an art and a relationship-based process. we'll dig in, and I think we'll remain committed to keeping our faculties competitive against what the market can bear. So, you know, we don't know where other communities will be financially. You know, Westborough is, again, we face our challenges. Our tax rate is high. These are the things that we talk about annually. We are also very fiscally sound. Who knows what other towns are going to be facing in the next 3 years and what kind of contracts they're going to settle. Shrewsbury actually went back and their teachers took a cut. So they've got ground to make up now. So again, I think it's a volatile time. The health of each community is variable, and we're just going to have to come into that negotiation. But certainly we watch those trends, and I'm happy to participate in keeping you guys updated on it.
Thank you.
Paul, go ahead.
Thanks, Amber, for the presentation so far. Not to belabor the issue, but the math isn't making sense to me. If it's $25,000 gap, even if they made 100,000, 4%, it's 4,000. So I don't see how that's closing the gap a lot. And then I guess the second thing is, are there other forms of compensation that make us more even, that aren't salary, more competitive, I should say?
So one, we're a really favorable and caring district to work for. Two, I gave you an average because we looked at a range. So, you know, again, what I think is important, and again, I'm happy to talk about this in depth. I want to cover where we are with budget. These are the numbers that we're working with for the next 2 years. I think this feels like a follow-up meeting when I can bring you back really accurate detail. I also want to be clear that you're asking me to talk about negotiation process in public meeting, and I'm not comfortable. So I kind of feel like, I don't usually say terminate conversation, but I'm going to say terminate conversation on this. This is not public discussion. So negotiations is a process that takes place at the negotiation table. What I want to say is I respect deeply your articulation of wanting our teachers to be in a competitive place such that they can stay in our community. And that's a message that I'll carry back. But I also think it feels like a separate meeting where I can pull together stuff that I can talk about in public record, and I'd be happy to come back and do it again. Do you mind?
Yeah, this is Hank Roush. I mean, this is all good conversation, but it's really not germane to tonight's issues. And Amber's quite correct. And these kinds of conversations that involve union negotiations really need to be held in a executive session, and we're not in an executive session.
Okay, I don't get that, but I'm not asking about negotiation. I'm just asking.
No, well, you're asking about the result. I mean, we have the results of negotiation presented before us, Paul. We have a contract. We must honor that contract. We're talking about the possible negotiating strategies related to future contracts. Negotiating strategies are a subject for executive session, not for public session.
What? Okay, I don't know what we're negotiating. I'm just asking.
No,
We're not
Paul,
negotiating. I'm talking about having conversations about possible negotiating strategies by officials of the town, financially responsible officials of the town. It's not appropriate for a public session.
Okay,
but Paul, I just want to be clear. There's a lot we can talk about by looking at comparable salary tables, but I need to come prepared for that. That's all I'm asking, please. Like, I would want to pull our comparables that we used when we've had open discussion with the school committee, and I'm happy to return. So you've picked up an area of conversation that is in and of itself an in-depth presentation. So I at this point, I've tapped out my preparation for that tonight, and I'm just respectfully, like, if I start hurling around numbers, that's not good for me and it's not good for you. So please, respectfully, we all work in real numbers, and I'm happy to bring them back. Okay, so I welcome those conversations, and I welcome her questions.
Thank you. Another question from anyone? I have one regarding the kindergarten.
Yep.
And so last year we switched to full day kindergarten, and last year it was tricky last year because it wasn't being state funded, right? That was the gap year. So this year, or for this budget, we're expecting the state to kick in for full day kindergarten, correct?
So let me, maybe you're right onto a target of something, but I think it'll make more sense to you if I detail it when we go through the other steps.
Sure.
Because this year's budget in FY21, we actually have salary positions in, and we covered it with what would have been the gap of that warrant article. And then next year, the state funding is supposed to increase to Chapter 70 for the positions to cover it. So I think it'd be best if we review that when I step through the impact of the numbers, and then we can dig into it in depth.
Okay.
All
Is
right.
there a separate question anybody else has while we're still here then, or?
I just wanted to clarify then that the three bottom items that aren't open yet, you're still going to talk about, right?
Yeah.
So if I have questions on circuit breaker gap, kindergarten.
Yeah, we're going to head into that. Yep.
Okay.
Then I don't have a question yet.
Okay.
All right. Beth, did you have something? You're on mute.
Sorry. I just think one of the things that we need to be careful about when we're talking about this year, that year, last year, is that we have the budget years that we're budgeting for the school, and the school runs on a different calendar. So there may have been some misconnection of which years you were talking about.
So as of now, we're talking about the year that we're currently in fiscal, like the operational budget of this year is FY21. And I'm here with the proposal for FY22. What we've reviewed to date are all the impacts from the current budget we're now living in. And what you have in front of you in this slide is a projection of the impact that's coming into the FY22 budget, which we're going to now move into talking about. All right, so this is the kind of way we wanted to stage through this. It's easier to ask the questions as we go. So we already have one big takeaway. We'll do some salary discussion in another meeting, and I'd love to come back for that. And we want to talk more about circuit breaker and kindergarten to make sure everybody understands it. So why don't we step forward and then we can keep going. Jody, do you want to hop in before I do? Okay. All right.
No, I'm all set. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. All right, so from here, so let's transition to FY22. And for those of you that can see the picture, that is a kindergarten class in Zoom remote. Imagine that. Okay, that the world we're in is crazy. So there you see the two teachers in the upper left-hand corner and all their kindergartners interacting with them. Crazy times. So what is known is that we have, I'm sorry, let me go back. A level service budget. It has no increases to building level principals or department budgets. No music, no art, no athletics. The one exception is there's a $50,000 increase for technology given the substantial cuts we've taken to that department. Kindergarten, 8 salaries are currently going to be on the FY22 general fund budget, and 5 salaries will move, and 5 are going to be retained on the kindergarten tuition revolving account for next year, and that allows us to push that expenditure into FY23, just thus kind of breaking the impact down a little bit, and allowing us to stage in 2 chunks of salary impact, one over FY22 and then more over FY23, as we wait for the Chapter 70 money to kick in 22. And then you have some contracted services increases, minimal. It's paper, it's contracts for copiers, it's trash, it's utilities, and some special education contracted services providers. So that's all that's in here. So no new positions and the $50,000 of technology. The impact is really in those positions that haven't been carried in the budget, the 8 salaries for kindergarten. So as we look at the kindergarten funding, as I just said, This year, current beginning balance in FY21 on the kindergarten tuition revolving account, which now brings in no other tuition because we're now tuition free. We will expend the salaries that are on it this year, and we will have $552,000 left, such that into FY22 we can maintain 5 salaries on that revolving account, spreading out the impact over 2 years. So 8 will go on to the general fund, and the 5 you can see beginning FY22 here will remain on the revolving tuition account and then close it out. You can see at the bottom there, for you numbers people, there's $126,442 that we did not attach to a position to keep ourselves kind of covered for an emergency of unanticipated costs in kindergarten. But I'll talk more about that when we look at the final cuts I made to the budget, because it doesn't survive the final cut. So next, you know that each year, and I'm going to turn this over to Irene to walk you through circuit breaker, we receive Chapter 70 funds into the general fund on the town side, and circuit breaker is state funding that comes directly to the schools for tuition offset. It covers a portion of the cost for tuitions. And we always have to wait and ascertain what that amount is going to be against our costs annually. And then there's sometimes a gap. So I'm going to let Irene walk you through this slide.
Okay, so I'm going to get a little detailed for you. So I hope that, hi. So what we do is we take the enrollment as we know it, whether the students are in a collaborative or they're in a public institution or out of district private. And so we base it upon the tuition as we know it, based upon enrollment, and then we add a little bit to it because the they can go from anywhere from 4% up to 12% that we've seen. So we try to bring it down a little bit and add a little bit in there to make sure that we're covering ourselves a bit, but not over exaggerating it, because we know that some students come in and, increase our costs. And any one student could be $300,000. And I'm just saying that's modest. So if you go down to the second section there, so our claims are based upon our previous year's enrollment and what we paid. It gets very complicated, so I'm going to try to simplify it. It's based upon our enrollment from the previous year and what the state will allow us to claim for reimbursement. And it's based upon a threshold of the tuition that they will allow as well. On top of that, it's a percentage of that. So we've seen years where it's been 40% reimbursement on that calculation up to 75%. 75% is the highest we've seen. The year that we're budgeting, we know, because it's last year's money, is 70% of our claims. So we know how much we're going to get in revenue from the state on circuit breaker money. That's the money that we're offsetting on our general fund SPED tuition funds that we're calculating. So if you follow the arrow down, you see that our out-of-district private tuition is 2.74. If we apply then, we also get grant funding. So we apply that as an offset of $156,000. We don't know what it's going to be next year, so we offset it with what we know this year, and then apply that circuit breaker reimbursement amount that we know against that, And then the general fund out of district is the 1.374. So we know that that's what we need to calculate into our general fund budget. Okay, I don't know if you're following, but we only do that calculation against the private out of district funding. It just makes it simplified rather than splitting it up to the collaborative tuitions and all of that. It's complicated as it is. So we just keep it simplified as much as we can. So if you go down to the bottom box there, I'm bringing down the 194,371 for the collaborative, which is the same as the top box because we didn't do anything with that. And then the net amount after all of the circuit breaker offset and the grant offset is 1.374. So now what we carry into the general fund is the 1.5688 amount. So if you have any questions about that, you know, feel free to talk about that. I know it's not easy to follow if you're, you know, this is the first time you've seen it, or, I mean, Amber and I talk about this all the time and we have to, you know, stop and say, okay, wait a minute, what year are we in? Because it's a year lag. The year that you get it is not the year that you're calculating your enrollment, it's the year before. And when we roll over the money, it's the year, you know, that we're budgeting for, you know, further. So it's like a 2-year lapse. So
two things to complement Irene's, actually you did a great job stepping them through that, Irene. So when you get down to the bottom, the last number of importance is that last year's general fund cost was the 1,467,000. So the gap between what we carried last year in tuitions and costs that were budgeted and now is that 101,000 increase. One other comment on that, we carry an average of 4% to increase the anticipated tuition increases. That's very conservative. You have some that will go up 3, you have some that will go up 12 or 15. They're all under fiscal distress right now because they've been closed too, many of them. I imagine we're going to get slammed with tuition offsets and we have no control over it. They just send you the letter. And if you have a student in that placement or several, you basically absorb the impact of the increase. So again, it's complex. Any of the students in Westborough keeps the vast majority of our students in the community programmed with dynamic programming that we develop because we believe all children should go to school in their home community. But we do have some students whose complexities require that they have a different school setting. We keep that number to those that most require that. Most people want to be in their hometown, and we try to accommodate that. We have about 30 students that are out of district. So this represents the cost of that amount. All right. So do you want to, let's do questions just on this part.
Mike, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, Amber, in your presentation to the school committee on the 22nd, you thought that this whole issue of out of district tuition was really high risk, and those, to use your words, and you thought it might come in at 10%. Have you done any scenario work on the impact of that 10% on the rest of the budget?
Sure. I mean, you know, again,
thinking that you, excuse me, if you're thinking that way, I'm certain that you and Irene are, you know, at least putting it pen to paper.
Yeah, I mean, we run a variety of scenarios. We also try to continue to anticipate. We can look at their average increases over multiple years. Like we have our kids placed at, you know, places we can try to anticipate. It's just that they're in an unknown financial setting right now too, so it's a little more random than normal. We also usually hold 100,000 out for that very reason. So typically when Irene rolls circuit breaker, she wouldn't show the full calculation of that amount. She would have withheld 100,000, which was a practice that we utilized my first, I mean, I've been here 6 years, it's my 7th year. So my first 4 years, I think or 5, we held the 100,000 out. And in the last 2 years, as we've really tried to work to come in as tight as possible, we've leveraged that 100,000 into the offset. You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, all of it makes me nervous. We're trying to come in at as conservative and tight a percentage as we can. We've never undershot it. I mean, and you're going to see that we actually went back in and pulled a little bit more out of the percentage that we carried over. So typically, and I'll tell you right now, so when Irene does the calculation, she's got 4% on the general fund. You wanted to walk it through, Irene, because we pulled it out of the salaries we carry in the general fund.
Are you talking about taking it out of the general fund, the 4% off of that? Okay.
Yeah.
So, so there's an increase on the percentage of the out of district, and so so in the general fund, there's a calculation on the general fund tuition net amount that we took out 4% off of just that amount, keeping the 4% on the circuit breaker. It's complex.
No, but I just think to Michael's point, like we've come in really tight.
Yeah, I mean, this has never been done before. We've taken out the $100,000, and then we've taken 4% off of our general fund, off the out of the tuition amount. We've kept that 4% on the circuit breaker amount as a buffer of some kind, but so there's, you know, we're reducing our risk, but we're not reducing our risk to a point where we feel like we're putting ourselves in a financial issue.
Well, I guess, thank you, Irene. I guess my real question is the 4% realistic? I understand that you're trying to come in with a manageable budget for the town. My real concern is the number you're giving us realistic? Should it be higher?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, I think we would, we've done this in the past. I mean, we would go in and we'd have to make cuts to other expenditures if we had a gap in a number. And again, like it would be, you know, we might go back into that IDEA grant, and I would tell Sherry she would have to cut some PD if we got into a deficit, and we would line item transfer that differential over to cover the tuition gap. So again, we've done that in the past. We prepare ourselves with the 4% average laid on top of the circuit breaker costs and the general fund cost. And again, you're going to see that we even made some more cuts here, but you know, I think it's doable for the year. I guess the other thing is just, you know, there's recovery from budgeting like this, which is also part of what we have to think about over time. So again, we will just play it out. I think it's responsible. I mean, my job is to not do anything irresponsible that puts the district at risk. And I'm also very cognizant, and as is the school committee and Irene, about the responsibility for us to bring in a budget that can fit against the town budgeting such that the total package is one that we all feel good about approving coming into town meeting.
Okay.
So should we steam forward and then see where we end up?
I had one question.
Sure.
I don't know if I'm unmuted or not. Okay, in the second section down, it says circuit breaker offset funding. The one thing that confuses me is the top line is 20 actual breaker claims, and then you get 70%, you come up with this number. But the bottom line is titled estimated breaker claims, and isn't that not claims at that point? Because you're not getting 70% of that. That's actually what you're getting.
So we submitted the 1,730,104 were our actual claims we submitted. We got 70% of that, and that's why that 121 is the real amount. But we always show. Sorry, I didn't understand it.
I guess my confusion is the top line in that box and the bottom line in the box sort of are calling it the same thing, but one is a 70% number and one's not. They're both called circuit breaker claims. Well, but different. That's
I think it's just the terminology. Yeah.
Okay. So
it should be circuit breaker. You should take out the estimate at that point. It's what you got.
Right. I think what happened is that we just didn't update that terminology. You know what happened is that so now what happens is that we know when we're going to get into the coffers, where in the previous years before I was here, we never knew what we were going to get. So it was always estimated. So thank you for pointing that out.
Okay. So that whole 1.2 comes down.
Is the real amount.
Is the real amount.
It's a hard number. Yep, it's a hard known number. It's not an estimate.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
So this is the most in-depth conversation we've had on circuit breaker. We're getting, better about digging into the areas that are really interesting. You guys have tackled the detail stuff. I love that. Let's keep moving forward and see how we do. So the outcomes of that, the no new positions and level service with no cost increase. You can see across the 6 schools that they're all at 0. You can see that the district, there's just a recalculation of a correction Irene found for $400 in accounting that she wants to carry there. I'm like, get rid of that. Me is not a business, the way she carries her numbers.
I just got to get it done.
I'm like, stop that. Anyway, it's confusing. Special education, you see the circuit breaker gap there. You see the zeros of the other curriculum areas. You see the 50,000 in the technology. You see the contract increase for transportation, a facilities offset that we are able to get against the 150 we offset using community ed each year, and some other cuts, and you see 190,000, almost 191,000 of impact costs that have to roll into this budget. So the big ticket items that look at the base number, despite no new positions and no budget increases to the buildings and departments, you've got the gap in the circuit breaker. You have $700,000 of those 8 positions that are rolling into the revolving account of the tuition into the salary line item, and you have the $50,000 in technologies. So that 857, carries into the budget, and you start to look at the impacts. So when I brought forward that budget, where you see those same numbers repeating themselves, the tuition gap, transportation costs, the salary impact, the contracted services, that's paper, copiers, contracts, and you see that it rolls in at 5.6%. And that number is one I want to dissect a little with you and talk it through. So when I made this first actual presentation to school committee, I wanted to set it into context because I also had to understand it. I mean, I hound Irene, the level of time we spend looking at this money makes her crazy to put up with me. But I'm always trying to, analyze it and look at the analytics of it and then push on it. And so for me, this is how I made sense of it because I'm always worrying. So for me, when I look at that, how I understand this and how I presented it to school committee is, if I had been budgeting and coming forward with a base recommendation, a superintendent's recommendation, and I had been budgeting against what we had anticipated coming to town meeting with, the FY21 budget, without that 700,000 COVID cut, the budget would have been a 4.25% request. And that would have included carrying in those 8 positions. That's what's really kidding it. It's those 8 positions. hitting the salary along with the salary increase. So, but that's a percentage you've seen before. It's one we've navigated representing. So even if I had just been working against the prior approval we anticipated being with, that feels like a percentage that made more sense to me. And then I was looking at it further, and in understanding it, which I always am trying to do so I can speak about it, if we didn't have the 8 kindergarten positions in there, which we need to have, we've committed to those, and we were budgeting against the original budget, this increase would have looked closer to a 3% increase. It would have been 2.97. It would have carried the rollover of staff with no new positions and the contracted services and the gap in the circuit breaker. And it would have been a budget that would have looked, around this percentage. So as I'm trying to understand the context of the journey of budgeting, there have been so many versions of the FY21 budget that when I look at those, again, once you lower your base, your increase is going to be higher. So, we're budgeting against $1.2 million in cuts against that base. And it just, it definitely looks at the impact of that percentage. So the budget that I brought forward initially, the one before my recommendation, carried the 5.6% as a real cost rollover for the things that we've been talking about coming into this place. So I'm going to stop there. I doubt there are too many questions. I figured because we talked about circuit breaker along the way, I can steam forward, or we can take a few questions, and then I want you to see what I did with the final recommendation I made.
Walter, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I have a quick question as a newbie here. The Chapter 70 money comes to the town somehow, but does not show in the school budget, or how does that work?
No, it doesn't show in the school budget. The annual process of state funding appropriately brings Chapter 70 to the municipal side, and why we go before town meeting to request the funding budget. We have some monies on this side, the tuition accounts, the few revolving, and then the base request, and the circuit breaker is the only funding that comes to us from the state on this side. We do have grants, though, that come to our side. Again, we spend much more. Westborough is a committed community, as any community like us, spend well above what Chapter 70 sends to the town. So it's a reasonable offset. We're always hoping that Chapter 70 continues to increase to the true funding cost of what education is. And they've made some commitments in that pre-COVID to continue to lift both Chapter 70 and circuit breaker. But, we're kind of in an unknown world, but it goes to the municipal side. You'll see it in the budget when Christy presents the complete budget. It'll be in the revenue side for what falls into free cash. It doesn't really fall to free cash. It falls to the municipal expenditures.
So the 8 additional salaries that are showing up now on salaries will also increase some amount, the amount of Chapter 70 money in, I don't know if it's next year or the year after at some point, is that?
Yeah, so right? I'd like to talk about that, but yes. Okay. So let's just take that as a question piece, which is we covered this year, the positions came in, 8 of them, and we used what ended up being, instead of a warrant article where we would have been requesting, I think, 500 and something thousand, and then some remaining funds we had in the K revolving from tuitions, would have been a warrant article request. And when town meeting got canceled, we wouldn't have been able to move forward with kindergarten tuition free this year unless we worked with you guys on the committee and with the town manager and with Leah and school committee to take savings from transportation and some savings from subs to pay the funding in this year, as opposed to having to come for a warrant article, which again was advantageous to managing the crisis that the town was in with a drop in revenue. So now moving into FY22, the cherry sheet should show Chapter 70 increasing by the students kindergarten students were counted 0.5, they'll now be counted as 1.0. So our overall increase should go up by about 800,000. So Chapter 70 on the town side is anticipated to spring back by about 800,000. Well, increase by 800,000. Sorry, Leah would kill me for my terminology. I just hope she's not watching. It'll increase the Chapter 70 by about, we anticipate about 800,000 once they're counting kindergartners at 1.0.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? All right, how about if I steam forward and we'll see where it goes from here in the story of the budget. 5.6%, fiscal crisis, unknown revenue, anxiety-provoking time. I really had to sit with that number. I would say I just want to be on record as saying this is the hardest stretch of budgeting I've ever faced in my life. And the unknowns are so drastic, and the sense of responsibility to our community and to our district are so immense that this has been really hard. But in listening to the feedback when I was presenting the initial budget to the school committee, they were struggling with seeing that increase as well, and not knowing what the revenue is going to look like on the town side with, with DoubleTree closed, but Amazon coming on, we just don't know. And so given those anxieties, spent a lot of time, and I centered on really these things that led to my final recommendation, which was our collaboration with the town during these unknown fiscal conditions remains a commitment of the school committee that represents the district. And we anticipate some loss of tax revenue. We don't know what. There are capital expenditures that are coming forward because the world doesn't come to a grinding halt with what we're facing. We need to manage those costs. And there will be town increases because I know that they've added positions that they needed at police, and the EDC coordinator is going to be hired, and the HR coordinator. And I know that the fire positions are coming off that grant. So that weighs heavy as well, because, those are all it's all one big budget. It's only one tax dollar. So that certainly sits heavily in these decisions. And the end of COVID emergency funds is just, creating pressures that we don't really know the fiscal impact of yet. And then lastly, trying to be strategic and thinking about budgeting over not just 1 year, but 3 years to think about maintaining where we are as a district are the things that kind of led me to my final recommendations. So what I requested of the school committee to consider, and I just want to be clear that Irene does not agree with these cuts. So Irene and I are usually fairly cohesive on this. She does not agree with some of the selected choices here, and I certainly will highlight them. We can reduce, I'm coming forward with a $400,000 reduction to the 5.6% that I showed you. I'm reducing the summer programming of our extended year schooling because I looked at the true cost over multiple years, and then I built in anticipating that we might have some more students who need recovery summer programming, and I still feel like for next year I can reduce it by the 24,000. I'm going to take that and feel that we can manage it. I think Irene agrees with that one. We're going to take one of the 8 positions that is currently in the line item for salary, and we're going to utilize the 126. Hank sounds like we're losing Hank there. Where'd he go? You might need to mute him.
He's just banging his head against the table.
I know. He's listened to this multiple times. He's asking me all those questions about it. So Irene had automatically, because she's built for safety, held the 126,442 in that kindergarten tuition. So I asked her to take one of the 8 positions that's in the salary currently and move it over so that we'll have 7 in the FY22 budget and 6 in the FY23 budget. And we'll zero out the tuition account. I went back in and I zeroed out trash and phone increases and electricity increases. So those are those reductions so that they're level funded with no 2% increase to the anticipated costs. We carry a $30,000 furniture line item for general rotational recovery of furniture because it's just, you have to buy new furniture with 4,000 students in school. And I'm reducing it by 20,000. We'll just hold 10,000 for emergency purchasing. And I reduced the facilities account by 30,000 and we'll defer some maintenance work and some purchasing of supplies, hopefully. And then we have a revolving account that existed years ago when some school choice funds had been collected. It used to be up around 800,000, and over the years it's been paid down in my lifetime here, and it had been paid down before I got here. And there's $150,000 in that account. I'm gonna zero it out. So the impact of that is it lowers our overall request, which makes our percentage recoveries over the next couple of years that much harder. Irene doesn't agree with the facilities cut or the trash and phones and electricity, or really completely removing the 150, but we've negotiated to the middle. And it's my final, that's why it says superintendent's recommendation, because we duke it out and then we go from there. So what happens when we make that recommendation is that you see the impact to the operational budget side in terms of carrying cost. I applied that against, you can see, I zeroed out applied it against the tuition offset of the 101 on the circuit breaker. I applied it against the contract costs, and I applied it against the transportation contract impact. And the facilities, you can see, then has additional savings. So the total overall operational budget now is reduced by, instead of going up by 190, it's reduced by 18,000. And that would make the recommendation that I put forward in front of the school committee for their consideration last week, a 4.9% increase. So they're taking this under consideration. They've asked some of the questions that you have. I think they want to make sure that, that our recommendations don't compromise our fiscal responsibilities to provide programming. And I have done the best. I think Irene and I have done the best we can to maintain the safety of our budgeting while trying to be responsive. I want to look at the impacts of this before we open it up for the final phase of discussion. These are just the cost centers, so you can look at them in detail. I'll send you this when we're done. A recovery and impact has to be part of this discussion. Reductions over these last 2 years will need to be recovered over time. And to the point of the conversations that you've surfaced, because you're fiscally thoughtful people and your money people. The bus contract mitigation, there's 300,000 of that, the one-time offset, and and the 60,000 of the 60,000 from technologies. Like, some of those cuts need to be recovered over time. The COVID cuts, we did not add back in any of the positions that were shown as cut in that budget, and none of those cost impacts, other than the 50,000 for technologies, have been folded back into this budget, obviously. And then you have the 400,000 additional cuts that I'm putting on the table. And lastly, we need recovery time for the revolving accounts, which allow us to reduce our requests annually in budgeting, because now these accounts are very controlled against very confined and set expenditure allowances. And when we can, for example, community ed brings in revenue we have to maintain revenue to pay all the salaries for the people that work in community ed, but we take $150,000 to a $200,000 utilities offset cost against our request in budgeting annually. So we reduce our budgeting annually by the success of community ed. Athletic and gate fees and facilities fees are used to offset athletic costs, and the facilities fees for people that rent the facilities are used to reduce maintenance and warrant article requests for replacement and care of equipment. Student activities is used to offset projects. We used a lot of student activity funding over several years along with our fundraising to reduce the cost of the fields when we repaired them. So these accounts have been leveraged appropriately to reduce our impact at the request of the budget level at town meeting. But all of these are depressed financially now because their revenues haven't been coming in. So they need 2 years for recovery. I'm currently looking at them with Irene, and we need to rest them because there's no revenue coming in on them, minimal amounts. I mean, so I think that's something that, again, we look to have those we look to be able to take my goal is that we take the continued offsets that we annually do so that we don't have budget increase unanticipated into 23, but we can't take more like we did when we did the $200,000 one-time transportation rescue. We can't do that. So again, I feel that this budget was really hard to produce. I obviously, with a lot of consult with a lot of people and a lot of time working on it, struggled with it. I feel good. I feel good about our recommendations that I hope the school committee, I don't know what the school committee will vote. I'm anticipating that they'll support the recommendation, but I think their meeting next week will be important to hear what they're thinking. So that's where we are, and I'm going to stop talking and open it up to questions.
Anybody have something? Yes, Jody.
You're muted, though, Joe.
Thanks. I'll comment. I think the work on the $400,000, bringing it down from that first set of numbers was good work, important work, and it looks like very difficult work. But 4.94% increase just rings better than a 5.68% increase. Bringing it below 5%, I think there's sort of a perception barrier there that is worthwhile. I too am going to be very interested to see what we need to be spending to meet the townside needs and how that ends up being represented in the average household tax increase, what that bill is in a COVID year. So I know we're in a tough place not knowing where our revenues are going to be in a COVID year. This looks like a really good, responsible budget. I hope you're feeling like we're going to maintain quality as best we can, even though you're working very hard to control numbers here.
You know me because you led me. I would never compromise us. So, I feel like we've created some amazing dynamic programming that I think serves our community well. And I will maintain that, yes.
That's good. Well, this is fine work. Thank you very much.
Paul. Thank you, Jody.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I kind of echo pretty much what Jody said. I've been watching the school committee meetings, and so I've seen this evolve and really appreciated how you approached it. And I really like that you've, as Irene said, it's some of these sort of rainy day funds, and it's never going to rain more than it is now. And I've always been the one anticipating this rain to come, and now it's here, and you're reacting very well to it. And I also recognize, appreciate that it's not padding isn't the word, but knowing that increases in future years may be higher than they would that if you kind of went for it now, and then it would be easier in the following years. I appreciate that you didn't take that approach either. So those two things together help us survive. And again, we don't know what the revenues are going to be, but it really makes a lot of sense. Helps us to survive the short term, and then we'll have to deal with the long term when it comes. Thank you.
Mike, did you have
Just a comment and a question. First of all, Amber and Irene, I was pleasantly surprised last year with the COVID-21 budget work that you guys did. I think it was, given the pressure you were under, I think it was quite a job to come up with those cuts, as the other departments also had to do. But I think everybody kind of looks at the school budget as a bellwether budget. The question I have is, to be perfectly candid with you, you're stuck in some respects between a rock and a hard place. If the revenues don't come in, and by the way, have you been given any kind of indication from town management as to projected revenues, or are you working in kind of a fluid environment?
So I just want to compliment the collaborative relationship we have with the town manager and with Leah as a team. Their request is always that we budget for our needs and come forward with a fiscally responsible budget. And we don't work knowing the revenues on the town side, no. But, again, I don't feel that that's withholding or anything. I want to be clear in representing that if I have a question for Christy or Leah, they answer it directly and honestly. They are highly collaborative. And I often call Christy and speak with her about, I knew, I had in my mind that their impacts they're facing too, having watched their work, that they've got some of those budgeting hitting over the next 2 years as well. So, Mike, it's very collaborative right now. We're all invested in both providing quality services in town while, leveraging the best for our taxpayers as we can.
All right. Well, to be clear, I'm not impugning anything to anybody. I'm very pleased to hear that you're working collaboratively.
Yeah.
My real question is, and I looked at the school committee meeting, and I thought you made a couple of very courageous comments. As I said, I think you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I'm assuming that you guys have kind of done some planning on a what-if basis. If the revenues don't project the way we hope, if funds from the state don't materialize the way we hope, I guess my real question is, what are you confident right now that this budget is realistic for Westborough?
Yes, I am.
Okay. That's all I need. Thank you.
I have one comment. So, and I think this came up earlier in the discussion with Walter, the Chapter 70 funds, and we do usually, or historically, and Hank, you I think have the most historical memory of any of us here. You can correct me if I'm wrong. We've always kept sort of those two discussions separate because Chapter 70 is sort of out of our control. There's no guarantees there. However, I'm thinking, and this is, I guess, to the committee, I'm thinking of it a little bit differently this year in that, because now with the change to full-time kindergarten and all those additional students being counted towards Chapter 70, maybe this year we need to look at any differential we get in that Chapter 70 funding, and it in theory would be a one-time increase that would then level off again, theoretically, as that differential sort of offsetting some of what we discussed here this evening. And I don't know what people's thoughts are on that.
Sean, the Chapter 70 funding flows into the town's general fund. The Chapter 70 funding does not come under the control or auspices of the school department or the school committee. The Chapter 70 funding becomes a revenue stream to the town on the town side. If we as a finance committee would like to see an audit trail on how much the Chapter 70 funds have increased and how the increase in Chapter 70 funds is being dispersed or how it's being applied to manage and mitigate our taxes, that's a conversation we should have with Christy and with Leah. Because they are the folks who Leah is nominally the recipient of the Chapter 70 funds that comes on the town side, and how we adjust other town spending to compensate for the increase in Chapter 70 funds is accomplished by the town manager.
To that point as well, and then I'll let Jody comment. I'm sorry to hop in. I mean, again, it does flow to the general fund, and it just provides revenue that reduces our overall tax impact. So, again, it doesn't. I don't think. I mean, this is my opinion, so I'm just offering it. You know, what side it falls to doesn't matter. It's not like, you know, we have to come before town meeting and the people of the community vote our budget, and the revenue impact is based upon the overall fiscal health of our community. And Chapter 70 is one piece of that fiscal health. And it doesn't anywhere near compensate for the total impact that Westborough has committed to paying for its education. So its increase is always advantageous and looked for and appreciated. And I know Leah is anticipating a certain percentage increase because she's worked with Irene on knowing what that number is calculated to potentially be. But it'll just make the overall tax rate, you know, less impacted by that amount. I don't, again, it's never going to completely, we have to give that and a bunch more, you know, to cover the cost of schooling. And so I guess I feel like I don't feel the need to track that amount. It just goes against the overall general fund offsets that come up where we end up. But I'll defer to you as the financials, but I don't feel like that anybody isn't transparent about that. I think it's part of the picture.
Thank you. Jody, go ahead there.
I think, okay, one way to look at it, Sean, is when I, for instance, think about 8 teachers, and I think there was a number in here of around $700,000 coming back onto the general fund. You know, rule of thumb, back of envelope, an extra $100,000 is about $12 on the average household tax bill. So the $700,000 could, you know, mean another $84 just for that piece coming onto the average tax bill. However, if revenues are coming back in through Chapter 70 to the town as an offset, that $84 won't go onto that tax bill. So that's one way of thinking about it.
Great. Thank you. Paul.
And so kind of taking all that into account, and I know I can understand the reasons to decouple the revenue and the expense because they don't match. But still, theoretically, I would like to see, instead of that 5%, I'd love to see another line there that showed $800,000 less or $700,000, whatever it is, and what that percent would be. In my mind, that doesn't need to be the way you present it, and I can do that myself. But you know, I would imagine that would bring it down much closer to 4% or something like that. But anyhow,
well, yeah, I mean, it depends.
To consider that.
I mean, again, it depends on the overall package of what comes to town meeting. I mean, I think, again, there's capital articles that impact. It's one revenue. You know, it's one tax impact at the end in terms of, you know, what we decide at town meeting, and the general fund helps manage that as well as free cash. So it's just doing what you guys do to come forward with a balanced package of working with both sides of the municipal, you know, planning, town manager, and all the departments she carries, along with us to kind of look at how to be strategic.
So
certainly,
I'm saying theoretically,
yeah.
the town side, as opposed to the school side, should be a little bit less of an increase in expense, or at least as a proportion of revenue than otherwise.
Yeah.
So because there is a one-time, not a one-time, but one first-time hit of the kindergarten on both the expense and the revenue side, and I think they should be considered together on the entire budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hank, please.
Yeah, I just want to inform the Finance Committee that Beth and I have both spent a great deal of time with Amber. We've become close friends going over with Amber and Irene, going over the gory details of the budget. And, you know, I believe it's an excellent budget. The budget is as good as we can do, given the assumptions that we're making and the constraints we have on the level of education we'd like to give our children. The key assumptions are that school enrollment in September of calendar 2021, September of fiscal 2022, will be the same as it was in October of calendar 2020. That's a very conservative assumption. It is very unlikely that the enrollment will be lower than what we saw in September of October of calendar 2020. You know, another key assumption is that we will have full-time in-person schooling starting in September of calendar 2021, fiscal 2022. Again, that appears at the current time to be a good assumption to make. It is the assumption that everybody has agreed is the appropriate one to make for budgeting purposes, but it does represent a risk of, for some reason, this virus situation were not to get under control, it would severely impact our ability to deliver the educational program, because that assumption says the kids will be in school full-time in the classroom. The other thing that I believe we've uncovered in looking at the budget, the school department has been very diligent in consuming reserves. The school department uses different terminology for financial reserves than the town does, than an industry would. But there's a variety of revolving funds and offsets and the ability to move funds between different accounting line items. They've done a really diligent job in taking the reserves down to a really minimal level. And we need to understand that in the future, the fact that we've consumed all these reserves does two things. One is there's no more reserves to take to the bank. If for some reason we have an increase in spending needs, we have no reserves to cover it. And second, over time, we will have to rebuild the reserves. So over the next couple of years, we're not going to see 1% or 2% increases in school budgets. We're probably going to see more substantial increases. Hard to predict what they'll be, but you know, we shouldn't think that we're going to see a string of minimal increases in the future, because we have consumed a lot of reserves and have to rebuild them. That's kind of my three comments on the budget. I give kudos to the administration, to Amber and Irene and all of their staff who put together a really aggressive budget. It's a good budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Hank. Anybody else? No. This was extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah.
And I know we're gonna, if we don't see you before then, we will see you at the end of January, I know, for a full day.
Yep.
If not before then, so.
So thank you. I have to say, really quality discussion tonight, and a lot of in-depth look at aspects of the budgeting where I think it feels like there wasn't confusion in your questions, it was inquiry, and that's kind of nice. I feel like we were able to present clearly enough that you were asking inquiry as opposed to confusion, like something didn't make sense. And I that makes me feel good about the presentation that we were able to provide, as well as the depth of your understanding. And I would be happy to come back and talk about salary work in the future. I will also return at some point when we do that extended day, and I think we would be looking at the whole package at that, and maybe we'll have a bigger picture of where we are. And then I think there's time, hoping that maybe we are at a March town meeting in a timely manner, or if they delay it and bring it maybe to April, we get it in before the fall. So thank you. I guess I want to say I'll send this to you. I'll stop presenting here. I'll send this to you, Sean, and you can share it to them, and it's available to you, as are any of the presentations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You guys are fabulous. If you have other questions, you can email Irene and I, or Hank and Beth, and we'll get back to you right away. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irene.
I'm going to go watch some football, I think. Just gotta say, we have to win this game. We need to win a few. So, all right. Take care, you guys. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Right. I did have a few other things to touch on. I think, I don't know if you saw Christine's email, warrant articles are due tomorrow. So I don't know when that means we'll get a first pass at the town warrant, but I think they at least get the list of what they think they're going to need, and I'm sure things will get added onto it, but hopefully it's the majority of what's going to be on the warrant. And that may mean in a couple of weeks we can get something that's sketched out. I'll touch base with her on that to see when that might get out. Another thing I was notified of was, yes, now that since we last met, the town has a Zoom account. I don't know if people prefer Zoom over Google Chat. Why doesn't everybody just, I don't know if you want to send me a vote, or what if, do we want to take a Zoom? Okay, raise your hand if you want Zoom. Yeah. Yeah. Most people on Zoom.
Zoom is good.
Zoom is all right. All right. So I will look to get that together for our next call. Let's see here. I think I got back. I had responses from almost everyone on the January 28th full day meeting. I let Christy know where we were at with that. And then, so we didn't, at fall town meeting, originally there was going to be a vote on moving the annual town meeting. And of course that vote didn't occur. I didn't see the annual town meeting on the calendar, but I think it's scheduled for like mid to late March. Currently, correct? Is that
usually, yeah.
Sean, the town meeting date is set by bylaw.
Yeah. And
So
I
it's-
saw the election is like May 7th, and I think it's the week after, or pardon me, March 7th. So that
It's the week after the elections, basically.
maybe
Like the Saturday
15th.
after the elections is the town meeting.
So I think that March 15th is like the target date that we need to sort of, work back from.
March Saturday. March 13 is that Saturday.
March 13. Okay, thank you. So I'll work back from that in coming up the meeting schedule. But if we have the full day on January 28th, maybe we have a couple meetings on the warrant before that. And then depending on how that meeting goes, we reschedule people to come in to talk about items, and I guess we can see what everybody has on the warrant. I may just put a calendar out there that starts middle of January and goes out a couple of times a week, just so we don't have any issues like we had with the last meeting.
Yeah, and it's also nice to get them posted in advance, and then you can drop them rather than miss a posting.
Right. Yeah, I went out and looked, and I think all the selectmen do is post one thing that has a note with all the dates they're going to meet for the next year, and that looks like that kind of qualifies to get it out there on the calendar. So I'll do that.
You don't have to even worry about the agenda. Like the agenda is to follow,
Right.
and then you post the agenda when it's ready.
Right. That was funny. I was telling Hank, so we were originally supposed to meet on the 30th. I don't know what happened to everybody else, but my neighborhood was without power from 5 to 9 p.m. So it worked out anyway.
Yeah. We were without power.
So,
Sean, will that budget meeting, that full day budget meeting, also include, if we want, the warrant articles that as the departments are there? Or is it just
it has not in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I guess here's the reference.
We typically meet either the first or second Monday in January when we have the budget book and we know what the budget book looks like, and we have a reasonable view of what the first pass warrant looks like. And it's usually a pretty short meeting because we just kind of deal with what are the issues that we're concerned about, and we want to make sure that our liaisons talk to the various departments and get data and information brought to us.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. How do you have a full day if we're just looking at the budget? I would think the people are there at that point. Why do we need to drag them back in and accept an exceptional case?
Well, again, usually historically, what we discover is that we have questions that other people don't have, and you can't get through them all in a full day. There's a lot of departments to go through, and a lot of people ask questions.
I thought the full day was new last year, or 2 years ago. It was the first time.
It was the first time we did it, and then after that, we still discovered that we needed to talk to departments. Some of the departments, not all of them, independently, because there were issues, mostly warrant article issues.
It seemed like it was a lot less, is what I was going to, what I was getting at. So I think I don't think we should be against having them discuss that.
If you are trying to ship
Otherwise, I
outside
don't
the
know
USA,
a lot of
please
them.
be aware.
The departments are going up 3%. There's not a lot to talk about, but I'd love to, so I don't know, whatever you guys decide.
Right. Yeah. And let's see once we get the books.
Right.
So then the first Monday in January is the 4th. And we should have books. We should have a warrant, get together on the 4th and just sort of walk through everything. Yes, Jody.
I'm probably not going to be available on the 4th. That's just me.
Okay.
And it's also
it's
right after New Year's.
Yeah.
If we could
If
start.
you push it out another week, it won't be a problem.
Yeah, the 11th.
Yeah. I mean, I feel I'm more comfortable with that.
11th. Okay, if that works for folks, yeah, I think that's fine because, even then, that's over 2 weeks ahead of the budget summit, and so we should be able to sort of get together our questions as a group, and so we can make sure that we feel prepared for that. So the 11th, and then why don't I assume? Well, the 18th is a holiday. Not that holidays are the same this year, but why don't we go 11th, 14th, maybe 21st?
Yep, Thursday.
25th, you mean?
Do you want to skip the Thursday?
Thursday the 21st.
Yeah, Thursday.
Or do you want to stick with Mondays?
We could just go the 11th and the 25th.
The 11th, the 14th, and the 25th.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, skip the 4th. I guess the joint budget meeting was supposed to help us have fewer meetings, but I agree we should get together once or twice because I know the Board of Selectmen us bring in the free thought, questions. So I would say at least 2 meetings in January before the 25th just for us to get some questions formulated before we get in the joint meeting.
Okay. So
just pick 2 or 3, I think.
Yeah. So 11th, 14th, and the 25th, maybe.
Okay.
And then the 28th is already the full day. So I'll get those 4 on the calendar because I'm pretty sure I need to put out a since we're meeting as a group with everybody else, a meeting out for that full day as well.
Yeah.
Like a town meeting or whatever. So 14.
So I have one thing to offer. This gives us 2 meetings the week of the 11th, then 0 meetings the week of the 18th, and then 2 meetings the week of the 25th. So I'm wondering if we could swap Thursday the 24th for the 25th. Then we'd have 2 meetings during that second week, 1 meeting during the third week, 1 meeting during the fourth week.
So 11, 14, 21, 28.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has feelings about that.
That works for me.
Yeah, it makes sense to have one during the third week.
Okay,
versus two.
distribute them a little better.
Yeah.
Okay, 11, 14, 21, and then our full day meeting on the 28th, and then depending on how those go, we'll look out through February and up to the town meeting, the currently scheduled date for town meeting. Right.
I have a question about Amber. Does anybody still have the stomach to bring her back to talk about the compensation issue? I'm sorry, but I think that's a small time bomb waiting to ambush us.
Well, that's a very
Mike, it's appropriate to have that conversation after town meeting. But it has 0 impact on this year's budget.
Yeah.
It's an FY22 issue.
We're not going to do anything about it until the new contract.
Well, I understand that. I guess my frustration is that she said we've got this gap. I accept that. And just building on what Paul said, even if you do the math, that gap is always going to remain. Now, I understand there are issues around the contract that we can't discuss, but I'm just concerned that is sitting there, and I don't want it to get lost, because I think we're going to be, as a committee, dealing with that for the FY22 calendar year, and that's all I'm going to say about it. If we don't have, as a committee, the sense that we should bring her back, then we bring her back at some other point. But I really would like not for what we discussed to, get swept away among other issues. Right. That's all.
I think it'd be interesting to see the comparable towns and the steps and all that.
But again, it's just a matter of the school department is really busier than hell until they get through March town meeting. Once March town meeting happens, I mean, Amber has been very good about bringing all kinds of competitive statistics. She has all kinds of benchmarking data. We can ask her to come in April and bring her salary and performance benchmarking data and visit with us. She's done a really good job of that in the past, and it's really good data.
And one of the things that's happened is that we have a much more consistent dashboard than we've had in the past. And so that may have highlighted where we are with respect to salaries. And so give her time to follow through on that in terms of what's happening more accurately with the dashboard with the other communities as they finish their budgets.
Okay, I'm willing to wait until after town meeting. I mean, it's only months away,
No,
I agree. Sorry, the town meeting. Sorry, Sean, but just remember the town meeting could get delayed again too. So consider that as well. Whether we would put it beyond the adjusted town meeting, or whether we'd still want to tackle it.
Right.
Well, I think there's 2 things. The town meeting is less likely to get delayed now that we have a plan in place for how to hold town meetings. I think that was a huge problem before. And if our town meeting gets delayed, then the date is also going to get delayed.
Right.
So I think it makes.
Yeah, but no, I agree that the focus is currently on the warrant in the town meeting. But this is something that we do want to get a review of from her. So I think as soon as, any time after town meeting, and we can see if it looks like town meeting is going to be moved dramatically, but we feel comfortable that the the work needed for town meeting is complete, then maybe we can look to schedule it at that point. But I think she did mention, you know, the contract is for next fiscal year and the year after that. So I think, you know, we have a little bit of time, but it is definitely worthwhile having that. Yes.
So I have another thing I'm interested in hearing a little more about is Hank sent out this very interesting thing about the whatever the group is that sets the tax rate and commercial, residential, and single tax rate and things like that. And I was wondering if that's ever going to get discussed or something, because I just feel like we're coming to a year where, you know, whether you use reserves versus taxes and whether you consider things like commercial versus residential rates and stuff might have to become more, or not have to, could become a very important topic.
Policy is the purview of the selectmen. So that's something that we can discuss, but really it's their domain.
I have no interest in telling them what to do per se. I'm interested in learning about it.
Yeah, and I agree. And as an advisory finance committee, there's nothing wrong with us advising. I mean, and we advise town meeting about it. So I understand the executive branch sets the policy. The advisory finance committee advises the legislative branch. But I think we should be well informed and understand the implications, especially to the tax bill, because we advise the town meeting on what to spend that ends up being the citizens' tax bill. There's no downside to discussing that and understanding it better and understanding why the selectmen decide to do what they decide to do. I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, I support that. I absolutely think we should have a discussion.
I mean, there's two separate conversations here. One is, do we use reserves to offset? Do we budget to use reserves to offset the impact of our increases in spending? And that's a conversation that will come up and can come up in the context of all the budgeting conversations we're going to have between now and town meeting. Then there's a second conversation, which is it appropriate for the town to consider going away from a uniform tax rate? That's a conversation that makes sense in the early next fall, like September of next fall, because that issue comes up for conversation in like October, November of the fiscal year. Having that conversation in January, February, March is kind of like a null conversation because no action can be taken. The decision for the current year's decision has been made. The tax rate has been set for FY21. The tax rate gets set for FY22 in the fall of calendar year FY21, and that's when you should have the tax rate discussion. In the past, we've had the finance director and the chief assessor come in and explain to us what the issues are and how those changes would impact us and what the leverage is to make those changes.
I think we had them in a year ago. I believe it was September, right? So it would have been in September of 2019. We had him in and he did that review for us.
Yep, and it'd be appropriate to bring him in again this coming September for the tax rate conversation with the single versus multiple tax rate. But the issue of do we use free cash to offset operating expenses and such, that's a very legitimate conversation to have when we have the town manager and the finance director in front of us.
Hey, Walter, I would mention anecdotally that a year ago, September, when we had the town assessor in for that meeting, I believe the entire Board of Selectmen attended our meeting as well. They were very eager to hear what we thought about that topic. Yeah. Now, one of the concerns folks have is once you go off that single rate, it's hard to go back.
You probably don't. But
so that was the point that was made by the selectmen.
I don't know. I looked, not to get into that discussion, but I would love to see, I'd like to see a devil's advocate because the whole presentation was geared towards saying it's self-evident, it's fair, you know, to have them equal. And I'd love to have some kind of a devil's advocate on that.
The other thing that's interesting, and I missed the meeting this year, is when you go to the tax classification meeting, the assessor is able to have a full view of what the revenues were, and that's why you get a different tax rate. When we create the tables, when we're advising town meeting, we've got estimated, as Leah Talbot always tells us, these are estimated numbers, and that assessment meeting gets us to those final numbers. So, you know, I don't know if you remember, we were looking at 5% increases last year, and we ended up with a 2.97. And it's that tax classification hearing that actually explains the, you know, the spending and the revenues that got us to the final number.
And on the other side, that Hank, you know, as you split them out, I think that reserves conversation is going to be big, because we can't expect free cash to have built up the same this year as it has in previous years, and so that'll have to be dealt with.
You know, in the FY21 budgeting and tax rate cycle, we did consume free cash, and we did consume other reserves. I don't remember exactly which ones they were, but we consumed a variety of reserves to pull the tax rate down in recognition of the increases in 21. But we did do that.
Yes, but also I don't think, because they made all those cuts that they did throughout the year, there isn't going to be as much free cash, and they agreed with that. That, you know, just because they've been very frugal, usually those things build up and add to free cash for each year, and we're not going to get that too.
I mean, also, we're as part of the conversations we have with the finance director, we're going to have to talk about where we stand versus strategy for debt stabilization. I am suspicious that the Pulte properties are not selling as fast as we had anticipated, and we have a $70 million gorilla called the NEE failed school sitting in the background that's going to hit the debt line. Probably not in 22, but in 23, I think it starts hitting the debt line. And, you know, that 70 million becomes about 50 million, but $50 million worth of debt has an enormous impact on the tax rate.
Yep. So, yeah, so we're going to get our books soon and our warrants, and we'll all dig in. So just to review quickly, meeting dates 11th, 14th, and 21st, all-day meeting on the 28th. Was there anything else? Did we want to go back to the agenda? Was there any other future draft agenda topics that people wanted to discuss?
I heard 4, but it doesn't sound like any of those have to happen before town meeting.
Right. But I think those will be in the meeting notes, and we'll make a note of them and keep track of them for future dates. Do we have committee liaison reports? I guess that was kind of the school committee report.
I was about to say the school committee will be voting on the budget at their next meeting. And so, and they're not, I can't speak for them, but it's not like apparently obvious that they're blatantly going to go for Amber's full-on cuts. They may, but you know, that is still up for their discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
So Sean, is there a new table of current liaison assignments? Because one of the things we could do in those Januaries, when we do see the warrant articles and we do see the budget, we should probably all check in with our departments.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make sure I send that out.
Hi, Sean. This is Andrew from I thought I'd give a quick update of the Capital Expense Committee as well. So we've had a series of meetings already, and we've come to a place. We're using a new grading scale where we've broken down some 20 different requests on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being nice to have, 3 being essential, and 2 being important, but we don't know if we need to keep them. And through the first pass of the list, about half of the, I think it was 9 of the 17 individual items have made the rank as having more than half of the people consider them essential projects. We haven't yet attached funding to those projects, but that's going to be coming up at a future meeting. And the Finance Committee is going to go through and take a hard look at what the elements on those are, beyond the prioritization that we've put upon them. So, for example, a lot of school elements didn't make the top list in terms of priorities because when the work was being presented, the work was generally considered as best informed guess for costs, and that wasn't satisfactory as a costing methodology for most of the folks. So there's likelihood that a number of the school programs are going to come back and be hosted or be presented as much smaller asks to try and get greater detail about the actual costs of the projects. So more to come. Hank had asked me to prepare something, and then Hank, I apologize. I wasn't able to pull that together. I will take a look at all the pieces that are in flux and send an update to this group, and we can add that to notes if we'd like. But I just wanted to give a quick verbal walk down as well. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question. So normally the capital committee sort of has a dollar figure in mind of what they can spend. I think it's $1 million plus, some
Yep.
number. And are you sticking with that, or is
So I will say that in the ground rules that were advanced, the suggestion was there should be no limit on what we're trying to consider spending, and that we will we will attach, and we will vote upon the items that are considered most important. I would also say that is a difficult way to approach a capital conversation, because it literally is about spending money, and we need to know what our limits are. And so I think that the $1 million still hangs over heads as to the kind of limit, although it really is not bounding us. And I should say also that for the first time, much larger capital conversations or capital projects are being presented. There's $1.5 million school capital expenditure, for example, because it's one of those cases where a lot of capital projects were falling into warrant articles because they wouldn't fit in the confines of the committee. So there's reason and logic for it. We're not we're told not to think about this as having a budget, and especially now that the school ones are being reframed and recost, I don't know where the number is going to be coming down to, just because the school ones are going to change in terms of quantities very significantly.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. When do you have a final meeting coming up?
I do believe we have at least one more meeting coming up, and the hope is during that meeting that we'll be able to have enough feedback from the finance team to be able to start voting our recommendations on the capital options out there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Quick question: how are we doing on getting an admin?
So I had a discussion with Christy, and they have some thoughts about it they're working on, but didn't really advance anything yet. So, but hopefully something will happen in the new year.
Thank you for following up on that.
Thoughts don't take notes.
Yes, I know that for a fact. Please.
I concur. All right. Any other liaison assignments? All right. Do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn and happy Hanukkah.
Oh, thank you. Second?
I second that motion.
All right. Thank you. Oh, and usually I go through the roll call right here. All right. Ms. Hensley.
Hensley, yes.
All right, Ms. Board.
Board, yes.
Ms. Blumberg.
Blumberg, yes.
Mr. Roush.
Yes.
Mr. Bradley.
Bradley, yes.
Mr. Leslie.
Leslie, yes.
Mr. Hugo.
Yes.
Mr. Beretti. Mr. Beretti? Oh, did he nod?
Got a nod.
Yes.
Yes. Keo, yes. Thank you all very much, and I will talk to you on the 11th.
Y'all have a great holiday.
Yes,
Great.
likewise. Thank you.
Holiday.
Cheers all.
Yep, bye.
Bye-bye.
Safe.